And then if people hop in, nice. This is, again, another example of how maybe I didn't plan this timing out too perfectly. Yeah, so people will just hop in if they come in late, and that's fine. And I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome to our Working for Good Green Jobs, bringing together the environmental and labor movements in New Jersey with Berenice Tompkins from New Jersey Work Environment Council, NJWEC. First, I'm just going to go over some basic Zoom stuff. I know many of us have been on Zoom for a while. Elaine, this is your first Zoom meeting, although you seem to have really mastered it already. But we do ask that you keep your microphone on mute throughout the presentation to help with background noise. So the microphone symbol is located on the lower left of your screen, as shown here. And if it's crossed through, you are muted. Next to that, you'll see a video camera symbol. You're welcome to stay on or be off video at your choosing throughout the presentation. We are recording this webinar, so if you wish to not be seen, feel free to turn your video off. That's completely fine. And then lastly, we invite you to put any questions in the chat. I think Berenice and I will both be monitoring the chat as we go. It's going to be kind of a more informal chat, so she might answer questions as she goes, and there'll also be time at the end for Q&A. Before we got started, I just wanted to kind of quickly go over the Sierra Club's work. Like, the Sierra Club does have a labor and economic justice program. Sorry, I keep looking up here. This is where my big monitor is with my presentation. So basically, the Sierra Club has been working on this for a while. We are the co-founder with the United Steelworkers of the Blue-Green Alliance, which has grown to include 15 unions and environmental organizations representing some 16 million people. And we pursue our labor and economic justice goals with or through the BGA, with individual union partners, with emerging workers organizations and work centers, with frontline communities, and with labor solidarity and research organizations. So Sierra Club New Jersey chapter is part of Jersey Renews, which is a broad coalition of labor, faith, community, and environmental organizations demanding that New Jersey doesn't just act on climate, it leads. And Jersey Renews is led by the New Jersey Work Environment Council. And we've been working with them on issues like electrifying transportation, moving forward with offshore wind, and what a just green recovery would look like in New Jersey. And that brings me to introducing our guest speaker, Berenice Tompkins. Berenice works with the New Jersey Work Environment Council as the campaign organizer for Jersey Renews, which, as I kind of went over, is a coalition of over 70 labor, environmental, and community groups advocating for state-based action on climate and good family-sustaining jobs in the transition to a green economy. She is currently focused on coordinating Listen.Lead.Share, which is a series of community-based listening sessions on how New Jersey should reach 100% clean energy and what an equitable green economy would mean for communities across our state. So with that, I will turn it over to Berenice, and I will stop sharing my screen also.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Megan. And I, due to some slight technical difficulties on my end, do not have slides, but that is okay because we are a small group, and I think it will actually be nice to kind of talk face to face with all of you. Also, feel totally free to share questions in the chat or drop a star in the chat as I talk, if any questions are coming up for you, because I think we're a small enough questions or comments, or I think we're a small enough group that we can kind of make this more emergent and more of a conversation. So yeah, so my name is Berenice, and as Megan mentioned, I coordinate the Jersey Renews Coalition, and I work directly with WEC, or the New Jersey Work Environment Council, which is also actually the New Jersey state affiliate of the Blue-Green Alliance. So we're kind of like, almost like a chapter of that. And yeah, we focus on opportunities for building consensus and acting in solidarity between labor, environmental, and community stakeholders in New Jersey. And I guess I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about why climate change is a worker justice issue. And I'm sure that this will not be news to many of you, but Climate is a huge issue specifically for worker health and safety, and for the future of labor. And WEC kind of works at those intersections. And so we look at that a lot. And one really, really clear example of this is the impact of extreme heat, which we've seen really clearly, for example, out west, with extreme heat conditions and with the wildfires this past summer. Obviously, those effects are particularly intense for folks who work outside. For example, for farm workers, for folks who might work in construction and trades, for people who do other kinds of work where they're exposed to the elements like warehouse work. And particularly for unorganized workers, this is an issue because they may not have the same occupational health and safety protections, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a little bit. It's also just generally, obviously, it's hard to earn a paycheck when your workplace is underwater or on fire. And so just thinking about the impact of climate disasters, specifically on low-wage hourly workers, when, for example, small businesses have to close, that obviously has a huge impact on work stability for many lower-income workers. And also certainly for first responders, those people who have to go to the front lines to respond to fires, to respond to floods, are obviously at the most risk of their health being harmed. And specifically going back to the point that I made about extreme heat, it's projected that I think it's something like the number of unsafe to work heat advisory days could double by 2050, which obviously is a really serious health concern, specifically for farm workers and for loads of other workers who already have a high rate of fatalities from heat. Just to start from that place, for the same reasons why the climate crisis affects all of us, it particularly affects workers. I also just want to highlight that New Jersey was already experiencing an inequality crisis prior to COVID-19, prior to the last year and a half. And so many people in our state right now lack access to good and secure family sustaining employment. So we should be thinking, which I think you did a really beautiful job laying this out, Megan, we should be thinking of responding to climate change as an opportunity to address our climate and inequality crises together and create thousands of good family sustaining jobs, and invest in communities, all of which climate policy can do and has done. And I'll share some examples of that. And specifically thinking about ensuring that investment in a green economy does lead to creating these good jobs and doesn't lead to further outsourcing. So there's already been a huge amount of outsourcing of manufacturing work across this country and New Jersey specifically. And like I was saying, the emerging green economy can create millions of good jobs. It can also propel more outsourcing of work. If, for example, as companies are electrifying their vehicles, they choose to manufacture them in Mexico because it's less expensive. And so we really need to make sure, it's up to us to make sure that we are investing in creating good jobs here in New Jersey and here in the US, rather than allowing that outsourcing and that displacement of workers to happen. And finally, it's really important to ensure that green jobs are good jobs. One example of something that we really don't want is some of the working conditions that Tesla's workers have had to face. I know they were in the news recently. Tesla makes cool cars, but they do not treat their workers well. And because we care about humans, because we care about human dignity, and because we know we need more good, secure jobs, we want to make sure that green jobs are that they provide job security, that they provide opportunities for unionization, et cetera. And there's already some really, really great examples of that work being done. For example, right now, United Auto Workers is organizing to get a tax credit for electric vehicles that are made in the US. And specifically that are union made, which is a fantastic opportunity to keep those good union jobs right here. So that's just a little overview of why climate and worker justice issues are connected. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of some of these things. But I want to move into talking about some of the major opportunities for environmental and labor groups to work together here in New Jersey. And I may also share some examples of what labor and environmental coalitions have been able to achieve in other states. Some of that work includes the Sierra Club, which is very amazing and cool. So a really, really major area of environmental and labor coalition building and kind of connected organizing right now is offshore wind. And this is a huge opportunity specifically because New Jersey is positioned on the coast. It's positioned really well geographically to harness offshore wind. The governor and also the federal Biden administration have made offshore wind a priority. And so we know this industry is coming, and we need to ensure, like I was saying before about making sure that green jobs are good jobs, that it really brings maximum benefit to New Jersey workers and communities rather than the work just being imported from elsewhere, which could happen. Finally, offshore wind takes a lot of steel. And this is significant because, like I was mentioning before, a huge manufacturing sector has existed in this country, has been outsourced. And manufacturing of turbines is a really, really awesome opportunity to bring some of that back. And those jobs are really important because they're secure and long-term jobs as well. So a lot of the statistics that you hear about offshore wind in the short term are like construction. How many jobs will it take to build the turbines? But if we can actually create like a manufacturing supply chain for wind turbines regionally in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, that will mean those jobs could be around for hundreds of years. Like we're creating factories that are permanent jobs, family and community sustaining jobs. So that's why that's so important. And also it makes renewable energy production more low carbon because we are not having to import materials from across the ocean or from other places where environmental standards might be lower. There are a couple of exciting precedents in New Jersey for renewable manufacturing. So there's the New Jersey Wind Port in Salem County. And I think this is kind of a cool example because it was built on a decommissioned nuclear facility. And the wind port is the first purpose-built port in this country for offshore wind marshaling and manufacturing. So it's the first time that anywhere in the US, we've built a port that is specifically for creating and also harnessing offshore wind energy. There's also the Paulsboro Marine Terminal, which is going to be the largest factory in the country that will produce components for turbines. So that's huge. That's a really awesome example of that steel that I was talking about before. And that was built on the site, or is being built now. They just broke ground on the site of a decommissioned fossil fuel refinery, which I think is also really cool and really symbolic. And one other example I'll just share is that Atlantic Shores, which is a major company producing offshore wind energy, is recently made an agreement with 5 building trades unions. So that's a really awesome example of the kind of commitment to good jobs and to union labor that we want to see. I also just want to add that one of the major pushes of Jersey Renews right now, one of our major focuses, is making sure that offshore wind jobs stay in New Jersey and are accessible to local people. And there are a number of different ways to go about that. Pushing for a requirement for project labor agreements, also for community benefit agreements, which is like a certain level of commitment to local training, to providing a certain level of investment in hiring in the community where you're doing the project. Those things are both really important. And part of that is also advocating for sufficient transportation because, for example, the Salem County Wind Port is really far away from major cities, from where people in the area live, and especially for folks who don't have access to a car, ensuring that people can actually travel there to work is really important. And more broadly, just training and workforce development opportunities. So specifically for people who may not have had access to a union, one of the areas of work that Jersey Renews also focuses on a lot is connecting unions with community groups to identify different opportunities for partnership. Could look like apprenticeship programs, et cetera. And that's really important. Specifically, some unions have dealt in the past with structural racism and classism in terms of who has access to these programs, who's able to get a union job. And so it's super, super important to be working proactively to address that now, and to be creating opportunities to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to join a union. Another really major area of work for Jersey Renews, for WEC, and for our coalition is electrification. And mostly we've focused on buses, on trucks, and on other like big, medium, and heavy duty vehicles. And this is an important worker health issue, specifically for folks who are working in trucking and logistics and ports, and obviously also for communities, for folks who live adjacent to transit hubs. Trucks are a huge source of pollution in New Jersey, as I think many of us know just because we live here. And so one policy that our coalition worked really hard to push through is the electric vehicle bill, which basically committed New Jersey Transit to electrify all of its new buses by 2032. And that's a great win in and of itself. The bill was signed into law in early 2020, but it creates a significant opportunity because as New Jersey Transit is transitioning to electric buses, that means that we need to install charging infrastructure for the buses. We need to train people to operate and service the buses. And these can all be good paying local jobs. And they also, in particular, thinking about the difference in the kind of job that operating or servicing an electric bus versus like a diesel bus is, it has the potential to be higher paying because a lot of those skills are more digitized. And so it's actually a really, really good opportunity if we are able to offer that retraining to people for transportation workers to gain new skills and ultimately have access to higher pay. There are also other examples of electrification policy that we've been pushing for, one of which is the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, which some folks here may have heard of. That's basically a policy that would accelerate electrification of trucks, which, as I mentioned before, is super important. And again, is a huge opportunity. Building out that infrastructure and training people to operate these new vehicles all has the potential to create a lot of good new jobs, as well as potentially manufacturing jobs for vehicles and vehicle components, which manufacturing is a great sector to create jobs in for the reasons I mentioned before. One other area that we have been focused on is thinking about resilience and protections from climate impacts for workers. We know that some of the impacts of the climate crisis are already here. They're already happening. So for example, those too hot to work days, we know that those days are going to increase. We know that workers are already being exposed to unprecedented levels of extreme heat. And so one other campaign that we've also been involved in is a national campaign for the Occupational Health and Safety Administration to adopt a heat standard, which would basically be like a federal rule that would dictate when it is not safe for workers to work on certain conditions and require that they be offered shade, rest, water, etc. And so it's huge. That's particularly huge because it also protects unorganized workers like farm workers and warehouse workers who tend to be the most at risk of experiencing the worst effects of heat, etc., because they have fewer protections. And there was actually a victory in this campaign today, which was that OSHA got the go-ahead to start developing this heat standard. And this is something that a lot of people across the country have been organizing for a really long time. Finally, I want to open it up to see if folks have questions in a moment. But there are a lot of really inspiring examples in different states of legislation that is focused on addressing the climate crisis and simultaneously creating good jobs. And a couple that I'll share now. One is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act in New York, or the CLCPA, which some of you may be familiar with. that was passed a couple of years ago now, and the coalition that worked on it is now focused on a follow-up to it called the Climate Community Investment Act. But then also, just a few months ago, Illinois was successful in passing a bill called the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And I know that the Sierra Club in Illinois played a major role in the coalition that passed that, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. And so go the Sierra Club, as well as labor and environmental allies in Illinois. And just a few kind of highlights of that bill that I wanted to share. It has the strongest labor standards in the country on wind and solar developments. And it specifically requires project labor agreements, which I think I mentioned before, but basically a project labor agreement is like a collective bargaining agreement that also includes non-union workers. It requires those for all utility scale wind and solar projects. So utility scale is like basically beyond residential and also beyond community solar, kind of like what a utility company would set up. And then it requires a prevailing wage agreement for all non-residential clean energy projects. So anything that's not on your roof, the company would have to pay the prevailing wage in the area, meaning companies cannot undercut each other economically by paying less and having like a race to the bottom. It also has a just transition program for areas that have been economically reliant on fossil fuel generation. So this would also include protections for workers who may be displaced in the transition to clean energy. And that's really important. Like it's really important that we take care of workers who may lose their jobs or may either that we offer retraining to those workers or that we offer some kind of other financial compensation or support. And specifically, this is a really important priority for Jersey Renews and for WEC because we are a coalition that includes unions representing workers who work in the fossil fuel industry currently. And it's really important that those workers have an opportunity to shape policy so that they can be protected and cared for in this transition. There's also in this bill a requirement for prevailing wage payment for electric vehicle charging installation. There's a commitment to 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. So building out the infrastructure for that. There's also a commitment to ensuring good jobs in that sector. And then there are also various requirements to expand apprenticeship programs for unions, also for companies that are building out clean energy projects to follow certain diversity quotas and report out diversity data to ensure that they are hiring a certain number of people of color, of women, of veterans, to ensure that these good jobs are actually reaching everybody who needs a good job. And so just like a couple of considerations or lessons kind of coming out of that bill and other precedents for this and things that we might want to consider in New Jersey. Like I mentioned before, it's really, really key to center workforce development and training and to center specifically economic investment for the communities that are most impacted by climate change and have historically been left out of many green sectors too. So specifically immigrant communities, Black and Brown communities, and lower income communities in New Jersey. And some of our partners in the coalition have done some really cool work on trying to remove barriers to employment for formerly incarcerated folks, for undocumented and immigrant workers, for example, getting rid of certain occupational licensing requirements that might require a driver's license, et cetera, that can limit access for undocumented people. And so that's really key. If we want to address our climate and inequality crises at the same time, we have to create good jobs and we have to create accessible jobs. Everybody should be able to have a good green job. That's the goal. And one other like really cool precedent that may be something that we want to look at to do in New Jersey going forward is one of the things that New York was able to achieve with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is a commitment to invest 35% of all funds being invested in this transition to clean energy into low and moderate income communities, frontline communities. So there's a specific way that those communities are defined in the bill, but basically ensuring that the folks who have been impacted the most by climate change both are protected from the impacts of climate change and receive economic benefit and economic investment from this transition. Yeah, so this is something, passing this kind of legislation is something that several groups in New Jersey, including some folks in our coalition, are interested in doing going into 2022. And one of my current roles with WEC has been holding listening sessions with various community groups and labor members across the state to shape this policy. We believe that this policy should be shaped by people's experiences and priorities. And so I'm really feeling excited about that work right now as it comes together. And I think there are going to be a lot of opportunities to take action once a piece of legislation does start to form in 2022. Some of the work that we're also doing right now, specifically on the advanced clean truck rule and also on offshore wind in New Jersey, also really needs folks to turn out and support it. So if you are interested in showing up to stakeholder meetings, making your voice heard in support of policies advancing offshore wind or the advanced clean truck rule specifically, I would love to connect with you. I'm going to drop my email in the chat and feel free to share your contact information with me as well, because it's really important that people show up, not only to make sure that offshore wind and electrification happen, but to make sure that they happen in a way that benefits workers and communities as much as possible. Yeah, so that's my little spiel. And I would absolutely love to answer questions that folks have. And yeah, questions, comments, anything at all.
I actually had a question, Berenice. So you said that, I mean, you talked a lot about the Illinois legislation, which seems like very good kind of targets, like, you know, a shining example of what we are kind of working for. What, I know you said that like the work is happening in New Jersey, like, is there a bill that's been drafted, or is this something that's like really in the beginning stages? And would it be really similar to the bill that you mentioned, or are there certain things that like are New Jersey specific that we're really hoping we can get in? That kind of stuff. I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about.
Totally, yeah. All of that's an awesome question, because all of that is very much in the beginning stages and very much still being figured out. So the goal of the series of listening sessions that I've been coordinating with WEC over the past couple of months has been really to hear from folks, community members and labor members across the state, like, what would an equitable green economy look like for your community? And how do you think that New Jersey should achieve 100% clean energy? And so the idea is really that a policy that emerged in New Jersey would be formed based on the priorities and experiences that come out of these listening sessions. And I think we'll be continuing to host and support other groups in hosting listening sessions going into 2022 as well. But there may be some important differences between what emerged in Illinois and what emerges in New Jersey, according to what the priorities of communities and different stakeholders here are. And the bill is a little embryo to be grown into a baby. And, you know, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity as well. One thing that I would really like to do is like hear from Sierra Club members, hear from folks here too, like, how do you think this policy should look? And I'm hoping that, like, as we continue the process of policy formation, we can create spaces for that as well. So it's very much the beginning stages, and our hope with this, like with the Listen.Lead.Share program, is to be accountable to folks who participate in these listening sessions, and to be able to come back and say, like, here's what's proposed in the bill right now. What do you think of this? How could we adapt this? So I myself am probably not going to be like directly involved in writing legislation, because I'm like an organizer, not a policy person. But the goal is for there to be a lot of communication back and forth, and for Jersey Renews to be kind of a potential platform where that can take place.
Hi, I'm Elaine Mann, and on the legislation, I think you have the wind turbines and everything almost taken care of. My greatest concern inside from the offshore is having every single building that's built in the future, let's say in the next 3 years, anything that's constructed by the government, anything that's constructed by a commercial, a residential, must have a solar component in it. Because with the new lithium batteries, you could store almost this electricity inside your house. So if we have a natural disaster, you're not going to go offline. You could actually, use that. And all parking lots should have a solar component where you could plug in your vehicle. I mean, it's not that expensive to do. A Center State Hospital did it in Freehold, and it's very effective, and it helps with their energy bills, and they use a lot of energy, believe me, in a hospital. But I think we should try to do that also. And on the education component part, we need to get the high schools on board and the vocational schools to have the companies that manufacture these things have an apprentice program for the young people. Because General Motors always had an apprentice program for their workers. And it was located on 22 in Union, up in Union. And they would go to the school, they would get qualified in whatever they were going to do in the plant, and they were certified and they felt comfortable, and the UAW accepted them. So I think those two components, I think we should work on. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Solar is a huge opportunity, and I think specifically community solar is really important, because it's an opportunity to create jobs and also bring energy costs down, and create more public ownership of energy, and also create more resilience in the case of climate disaster. If we have localized energy that allows for less disruption of our energy system when there are climate disasters. So thank you for saying that, Elaine. There's a bill called the Clean Energy Equity Act in the shorter term that a coalition called NJ Shines, which I think the Sierra Club is part of, has done a lot of work on. Yeah, awesome. So Megan can probably speak to that more, but I know that has a strong focus on solar, specifically community solar, and also has a strong focus on workforce development for solar. One thing I'll also add is that historically, there have not been a lot of unionization opportunities in solar, which is unfortunate, but that is starting to change. And there are a couple of unions in the coalition that have solar apprenticeship programs, like solar installation training programs. So there is definitely some opportunity there. And it's a mixed bag, because right now there aren't a ton of unionized solar jobs in New Jersey, but there are a lot of opportunities for workforce development and for the creation of jobs that are accessible to a lot of people. And that's really, really important too. So I think there's also a balance between, like, we want to make sure that green jobs are good jobs, but we also want to make sure that they're accessible and that it's not hard to get one. And so, yeah, that's just like a little bit of context on solar. Megan, do you want to add anything about like NJ Shines or the Clean Energy Equity Act?
Yeah, I do sit in on the coalition for Sierra Club, but I don't think I can add anything too technical, like more than what you said. But Elaine, I'm happy to email you or call you and connect with you either way, whichever is easier. And I can send you some more information about the Clean Energy Equity Act and what NJ Shine is doing. The bottom line is that we are trying to get it through the lame duck session once the legislation, legislative, everybody goes back in a couple weeks. And so that is the goal. So we've been working a lot with Senator Singleton, who is the Senate sponsor, to try to get it across the line. But I can email you some more detailed information tomorrow if you'd like. And then also I wanted to flag, I think Diane had a question in the chat.
Awesome. Yeah. Oh, and one thing I just wanted to add to what you were sharing, Elaine, and then Dan, I would love to respond to that, is I think, yes, having partnerships with schools and with community colleges is so important for helping folks to get the training they need to participate in the green economy. And I know that that has been one focus of the legislation that was passed in Illinois. So that's something that I would really love to explore pursuing in New Jersey as well. And I know it's something that some community colleges and local workforce development boards have started to do autonomously. Like just communities and schools partnering to do like career preparation work for career pathways in the green economy. And it's also something that some of the like community-based worker centers that are part of our coalition, like Isles and Trenton, that they do autonomously. But there's definitely, I think, a really big need for more top level investment in that to make it happen on a larger scale. And just taking a look at Diane and Gail's questions. Oh, Diane, that's such an excellent question. I think that probably one of the best things to do would be starting at the level of locals. So for example, CWA, Communication Workers of America, is like a massive union. A lot of the people at the top of it are really busy, but there's a CWA District 1, there's a CWA District 37, and there are loads of unions out there whose top level leadership are supportive of this policy, but don't necessarily like have the bandwidth to make it a priority from the top down. And so you can, if you connect with like your local, wherever you are, they'll be more likely to have more capacity to have those conversations. And I would say, like, thinking about if there's a Sierra Club campaign where you could see there being a potential point of connection or solidarity building, just like reaching out to them or asking like what, how could we make this more meaningful to your members, and according to the specific issue area, I can definitely offer like recommendations of unions whose work would be impacted by or relevant to a specific campaign. For example, like in offshore wind, a lot of the building trades are involved in that. So like the carpenters, United Steelworkers is also impacted, like on the manufacturing side. For like electrification stuff, it would be more like the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, United Auto Workers, utility workers. So it varies a little bit, but I think definitely outreach to labor, direct outreach to labor is valuable and appreciated. And I think that especially when it's coming more from the bottom, like when it's not just a bunch of policy people in a room together, but it's people who are doing organizing, who are trying to make connections. And if this is something that you're interested in kind of like thinking about more together, I would be super, super happy to talk with you and kind of explore like what the opportunities are for relationship building around the different campaigns that the Sierra Club is involved in currently. And Jersey Renews is also, as a coalition, definitely a platform to make those connections. And while like our coalition meetings are primarily for like representatives of organizations, we do also do kind of more decentralized events and meetings like this one. And I'd love to kind of convene spaces where Sierra Club and labor folks can like talk in a horizontal way. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, I don't know if you know like locals off the top of your head, or maybe Diana already knows this, but she is the co-chair of our North Jersey group, which is Bergen and Passaic County. Yeah, I believe, Diane, unless I'm incorrect about that, sorry. And then Joanne is
Bergen and
group chair of
Passaic.
Central, Bergen and Passaic, perfect, of our central group, which is Mercer County. So yeah.
Awesome. I can't like pull it up off the top of my head, but I can totally look into it for
Understandable.
you.
Yeah, I can maybe include that in my follow-up email.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I would absolutely love to stay in touch about that. And I can always call upon the expertise of my super union knowledgeable coworkers who have been at WEC longer than I am, because they might be able to be like, Bergen County, that one. Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to stay in touch with you. Joanne. Just reading. Oh, let's see. I'm just scrolling through. Okay. Oh, I see a message from Gail. I have a strong interest in alternative energy. Lately, I've heard people say lithium batteries are made in China. Also comments that alternative energy is not working in Europe. I realize there are a lot of misinformation that the fossil fuel industry is spreading. Are there any lithium batteries being manufactured in this country? That is a fantastic question. And the answer is I don't know.
I actually really randomly do know the specific answer to that, which is that there are, I believe, 4 US manufacturers of lithium ion batteries compared to like about 100 in China. So we're really not a lot, but a few. That is all I know about that.
Yeah, and I think that also, that really speaks to the need to also invest in energy efficiency. And like it's not enough to be transitioning to renewables if we're not also reducing our energy consumption. And also it's not enough to be focusing on electrification if we aren't also shifting where that power comes from, because electrification also creates a higher demand for energy. In terms of your concerns, or like some of what you've heard about renewable energy not working in Europe, I know a gentleman who is currently working on a book about that very topic. His name is David Hughes, and I know him through the Rutgers AFT union. He's one of their environmental chairs. And I would be really happy to connect you with him if you would like to pick his brain. His research is focused on wind in Spain and whether it has actually caused Spain's like net carbon footprint rather to go down. It's super, super interesting. And he loves to talk about it. So I'm thinking he would be a great person to like dig into that more with, because that's I think that's a really important point, is like, how do we know when we transition to renewable energy that we're actually having a net negative impact, and what do we need to do to ensure that happens? And I'm seeing a question from Diane. I understand a lot of lithium is mined in South America. Is this true? Yes, that is true. What impact does this have on the environment? I actually think that Megan might be more qualified to speak to this than me, but yes, it's true. That there are definitely adverse environmental impacts associated with lithium mining, and I think there are ways for those to be mitigated, and to try to ensure more responsible sourcing of those minerals. But that definitely is an adverse effect of renewable energy, and like one that we should take seriously and try to mitigate as much as possible. And also, again, a reason why we need to reduce energy demand as much as we can. And like a lot of like thinking about legislation, thinking about creating jobs and efficiency and building retrofits, in addition to just in the renewable energy sector, is super, super important. Megan, do you want to add anything to that in terms of like lithium and all that stuff?
I think, again, I'm going to basically be just highlighting everything that you just said. I think with Sierra Club, like, there is this understanding, like a sad understanding, that all energy has an impact in some form or another. And that's why like energy efficiency is so important, and is something that we need to be working on hand in hand with also going to 100% clean energy. No, I don't have a more satisfying answer than that. Unfortunately, I'm also not an expert, but that's the general, it seems like the general like consensus among National Sierra Club people, I would say. Yeah. I wish I had something better.
That's a really important thing to bring up, though. I think it's important not to just assume that renewables are like a perfect solution. And also kind of speaking to some of what I was saying before about how we know that renewables are being expanded in New Jersey, but it's really important that it's done right. So like if New Jersey, you know, continues with these really robust investments in offshore wind and expands them, that's not enough by itself. Like we have to make sure that that's not causing low-income people's energy bills to go up. We have to make sure that that's creating meaningful job opportunities for people locally. You know, there's like, I really believe that we need to also be making our energy system more equitable, and more decentralized, and more community and worker centered at the same time as we're making it renewable. Because like big energy companies like to make money, whether they're, you know, doing oil and gas or whether they're doing wind. And so we still need to hold them accountable and make sure they do the right thing. That's my little soapbox on that.
I'd like to thank you, Berenice and Megan. It's been very, very informative, and we have a lot of work to do, as you well know, and we are venturing into the unknown, actually, with renewable energy. So it's like baby steps we take. We'll see what happens. We may have to come back a little bit, but then we can move forward. So I applaud both of you for your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.
I also applaud all of you for your efforts. Like the work that the Sierra Club's doing on a whole range of issues is really phenomenal. And yeah, just really, I'm really glad to have the chance to talk with all of you. And Diane, I'm going to make sure that I save your email. And I really hope to stay in touch.
Joanne,
Thank you, Berenice. If you have any suggestions for contacts in labor that are sympathetic up here in the north in Bergen and Passaic, if you could shoot them to me so we can do some outreach, maybe we can plan a joint thing. You know?
Absolutely, that would be so
Thank
cool.
you. Thank you.
Definitely, no, I think that's a fantastic idea. Joanne, did you want to add something as well?
No, I wanted to say thank you very much. You know, we're all in this together and we're all just starting out, but we have to move quicker. Can't dawdle, because I had a tornado a quarter mile away from my house in July. Never before. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. I mean, we didn't used to have hurricanes in Philadelphia. What the hell?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, that tornado came from Pennsylvania too, let me tell you.
Not okay.
follow George Washington's track across to the Assunpink. So,
Yeah, thank you so much, Berenice, and thank you everybody who came and took an hour out of your Wednesday evening. I think this has been a really like constructive talk and a really good starting point. Hopefully we can all collaborate down the road. And I will send a follow-up with a link to the recording, links to NJWEC's website, Berenice contact information, and other information that I wrote down that I don't have on the top of my head. But yeah.
good to
So
see you,
we'll be in
Megan.
touch. Good to see you too. And yeah, good to see everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.